Good morning, gentlemen. It's a nice sunny day. I'm going to talk to you about the India China problem. Now, let's accept the fact that India and China are two of the biggest, most populous countries in the world. India is ahead of China as far as population is concerned, but in other things, perhaps the Chinese are ahead. But I'm not going to talk about who is ahead or who is behind. We're going to talk about what's the geopolitical situation of the border at the moment. Before I say anything further, I'd like to bring one point here that in 1959, the Chinese Prime Minister Chou Enlai came to Delhi and he brought a set of proposals for a border settlement. At that time, China was not a great power, a little ahead of India, but that's about all. And it was very scared that Chiang Kai-shek, who was holed up in Formosa, would, with the help of the 7th Fleet, attack China again. Because Chinese had just taken over the mainland that the Communist Party of China only 10 years back in 1949 had. So the Chinese were keen for a border settlement with India at that time. And the Chinese Premier, Chou Enlai, came to Delhi. He had a meeting there with the Indian leadership, including Pandit Nehru, Govind Vallam Pant, Mahavir Tyagi, Krishna Menon, Morarji Desai, the whole gamut of Indian leaders, and tried to convince them, well, let's have a border settlement. And he brought a set of proposals which I'll delineate now. The proposal was that the Macmohan line in the east would be accepted by China as the border with India because Chou Enlai said we have accepted the Macmohan line in Burma as the basis of the border between China and Burma. But then he came to the thorny question of Aksai and said that area had been part of China for centuries and we have de facto control over it, and you agree as a quid pro quo to hand over Aksai to us. At that time, the chief of the Indian General Staff was General Timaya, and he was in favor of this. Because being a soldier, he knew that the situation could get out of hand and India would find it difficult to fight China in the mountain regions where we hadn't acclimatized our troops, and neither the Indian Air Force pilots had ever practiced how to do sorties and bombings in the hills. So he was a realistic man, but nobody was listening to him. Pandit Nehru tried to pass the buck off here and there. Basically, his concern was that he was a great third world leader and heading the non-aligned movement along with Marshal Tito and Gamal Abdel Nasser, and he said, I cannot agree to this proposal, and the best thing is that the Chinese should vacate this entire area and go back to the Johnson line. Now the Johnson line is a line drawn by the British, like the Macmohan line, named after the Johnson Aragd Johnson, who had been exploring that area, and the British had established their rights in that region and taken it away from Tibet. Historically, I already pointed out that Aksai was never part of India, and neither was Nefa. In other words, it was never ruled from Delhi. That is the point I'm making. If you look at the maps, even Aurangzeb, which had the biggest empire, or Ashok, they were never in this region. Well, gentlemen, the proposal was rejected, and Chou Enlai went back and gave his report to Mao Zedong, and finally Mao decided that the time had come to teach India a lesson. And orders were given out to the People's Liberation Army to prepare for a war with India. Now, if you look at the sequence of events which I made out, the onus of starting the war was with India, is with India. India should agree to the Chinese proposal, which are about the best which India ever got from China. And the problem is that India rejected it for no rhyme or reason. And if there is anyone to be blamed, it is Pandit Nehru himself, because on the maps he was showing Aksai chain as part of India, while there was never any de facto control over that area. See, when a successor reign or government takes over from another power and inherits all the liabilities and other things from that country, it is incumbent on the power which has come into being to carry out the old policies. So, if the British had made the Johnson line the border, it was imperative on Nehru to set up administration up to the Johnson line and position the Indian police or the army and the civil administration there. But it's one of the quirks of history that Nehru, who really had very little strategic sense and lived more in a make-believe world, he never did anything like that. And in fact, he came to know about Aksai Chin being part of China only many years later, when in 55 or 56, information came that the Chinese had built a road from Tibet to Xinjiang to finance, to send across their supplies and other things. Nehru should have at that time reacted, but he still didn't do anything and just keep sitting for a couple of years more. And in fact, in 54, he went to China. Chow Enlai came to India and he was given a hero's welcome and all that, And Nehru was talking of Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai. And then he had also formulated a set of principles with China called Panchsheel, or the five principles of coexistence. Now, there's a lot of bull now when you go through it. But he was a man who was a philosopher. He thought China and India should be friends, and he really not bothered. Aksai Chin le liya, koi baat nahi, doesn't matter. And he went on to make a statement, a very silly one. Not a blade of grass grows there. That means India should hand over the entire Thar desert to Pakistan, because not a blade of grass grows there. Gentlemen, what I'm trying to make out is that Nehru was an unrealistic man. He didn't beef up the army. He didn't set up the administration. The army is a very peculiar thing, because Nehru had a love-hate relationship with the army, And he kept the army defanged. No new weapons were incorporated in the army. The army was kept under wraps, not given any freedom. The orders of precedence of the generals and the other army staff was downgraded. And the fact remains that once the war in 62 took place, the Chinese were using the AK-47 automatic rifles, and the Indians were fighting with the .303 Lee Enfield rifles, which are of First World War vintage. Now, why Nehru did this? Actually, he was very scared of a military coup, and he was paranoid about it, because during his time, General Ayub Khan, the CNC of the Pakistan army, had taken control of Pakistan in a military coup and sent the president Iskandar Mirza in exile to London. He never came back. He was not allowed to come back. And in Burma, General Ne Win had taken control with a military coup. Even in Thailand, there was a military government, I think, which has come around at the same time. So with all this going on, Nehru was thinking, Are Baba, what would happen if the Indian army takes over India? I will be finished. And it was a question of his instinct for survival, that he kept the army defanged and kept the top general staff fighting with each other, and appointed a man called Krishna Menon as the defense minister, who didn't know ABC of defense, and all he knew was how to play politics with the generals. And that was his brief actually from Nehru. Then Nehru began to meddle with the promotions also. He promoted his, nephew or cousin, Lieutenant General B.M. Kaul, from Major General, and the army chief that time, General Themeya, protested and resigned. But Nehru withdrew the proposal, but once Themeya resigned, or rather he retired, Kaul was made Lieutenant General and made a corps commander, a thing which he had never done in his life. So the seeds of the defeat in the 62 war was sown by Nehru, by first of all keeping the army defanged and made impotent. Secondly, not accepting the Chinese proposals, which are very reasonable. Then came, of course, the 62 war, which I've discussed earlier, where the Indian army got a smashing defeat and Nehru couldn't show his face after that to the world. But the situation now has become from bad to worse. Because now, at that time, China was not a great power. But now China is the second biggest power in the world, with the second biggest economy, which is 6 times the size of India. The Chinese have built tremendous infrastructure in Tibet. They have a train line running right up to Lhasa, and I'm told they are planning a train line and a tunnel to Kathmandu, and they have got roads right up to the border with India. The saving grace for India is that Narendra Modi, who came to power in 2014, realized the gravity of the situation, and a feverish attempt to build up infrastructure was started by him, but it's not easy because we are way behind China still. So, gentlemen, the question is, the Chinese are now belligerent, and just before the G20 meeting, the Chinese have issued a map in which they have now upped the ante. When I say up the ante means they have raised the stakes. And now what the Chinese have done, they have claimed the entire Arunachal Pradesh, which they call Lower Tibet, as part of China, and of course Aksai Chin and parts of Ladakh as part of China. Now the fish, or you can say the fat is in the fire, and the Indians perhaps do not know how to react. By just saying that China is unrealistic, China is spoiling the atmosphere, all that is okay. But how do you physically react to the maps being shown like this? Because over a period of time, if you are going to have a solution with China on the border, these things are going to be worked out. And the Chinese have made it very clear by these antics now that they do not recognize the 59 proposals which they had made, that the Aksai Chin will be part of China and the Macmohan line would be the border between Tibet and India. They don't. Nehru at one time did hold all the aces. India had rights of troops in Tibet. We had Tibet as a buffer state. And instead of building upon that, this man frittered away everything. He gave away all the rights in Tibet, everything, and made a very, very foolish statement, in my view, when he said he recognized the suzerainty of China over Tibet. And he hoped that Tibet will be given autonomy. I mean, you can well imagine a statesman or leader talking such arrant nonsense. Because when you cannot match your words with military force, it has got no meaning. And the Chinese just took him like what he was. And in fact, if I remember correctly, reading about that period, in the 1962 meeting of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, which Mao Zedong addressed, he said that Nehru is being tough against us. He wants a war with us. He started a forward policy by setting up posts in regions which are Chinese territory, and we have to take an action. And he also mentioned that politically we are very well ensconced, very well ready. And at that time, he had approached Nikita Khrushchev, who was the first secretary of the Soviet Communist Party, and got his approval for the attack on India. Because Nehru thought he was a great friend of the Soviet Union, but when the chips were down, Khrushchev came with a statement that India was a friend and China as a brother. The Indians had already antagonized the Americans by not signing the various pacts, against Russia and the communism. And Nehru was preaching to the Western alliance, the virtues of being non-aligned. So they were not very happy about India, but they did consider China the danger. And the Chinese took a very proper time to attack India when the Americans and the Russians were busy in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now in 2014, the situation is very different. India, of course, has built up its army. We have about 50,000 troops positioned in Ladakh and other places facing China. But I'm afraid a short war cannot be ruled out because now China is seeing that India is a resurgent power. It's getting itself allied with the Americans, and it's about time India was taught a lesson. We do not know what are the meetings which President Xi is having with his general staff and others, but the fact is the Chinese, by issuing these maps, have upped the ante, and now I don't think the Chinese can go back. The enigma of Russia continues. What happened during the time of Khrushchev is going to happen the same thing now. Because Russians, I think, are not too happy with India for being towing the American line all the time. And Russia, we should not forget, is the ally of China. Vladimir Putin has given the G20 meeting at Delhi a bypass, but I'm told he's going to go to China for the Belt and Road meeting at the invitation of Xi, and he'll have a meeting there. So if it comes to the push to the shove, I don't think Russia is going to side with India against China. And if the Americans have a feeling that India is not their ally 100%, which I think they have already realized, because in the new AUKUS pact, they haven't included India. They have included India in the Quad, but the Quad, Indian keeps on saying, is only a trade agreement. In that case, what the hell is going to happen? I mean, India is neither on the side of the Americans nor the Russians sitting on the fence, and tomorrow there is a scrap. The Americans will definitely prefer Pakistan because Pakistan has been their ally since 1954. And only in 1962, a panic-stricken Nehru who got so frightened and scared that he wrote 2 letters to Kennedy asking for American bombers to come to India to bomb China. And then he asked so many weapons worth billions of dollars, all that. Of course, the Chinese, Americans just gave some piecemeal material, $500 million, and that's about all. And the Chinese were clever. After crushing the Indian army, when they were at their most vulnerable, they retreated and went back, declared a unilateral ceasefire. Showed to the world we have defeated India. So, gentlemen, the same sort of situation is approaching now. There has been a clash at Galwan, 20 Indian soldiers died, and the Chinese are in full strength there. They have been building bunkers and getting ready for winter and the long haul. Gentlemen, we should not underestimate the Chinese. At the same time, there's no need to be scared of the Chinese as well. They have a lot of problems themselves, which I'll discuss later, economic problems. But as it stands, he has to show something to his people, and he's showing that he's tough on India. And now the question is, tomorrow there's a short war with China. Will the Americans come on the side and fight here? I don't think so. The Americans have always fought for those people, those governments who were entirely their lackeys or yes men. They supported America because the Pakistan leaders were always saying 3 bags full to to America. So, gentlemen, India is not saying that, and the Chinese are breathing down India's neck. I don't think Russia can be relied on. America doesn't know whether India is going to be on their side or against their side, and whether India is going to go the whole hog against China for the sake of America, because America is going to judge you only from that angle. And gentlemen, the angle is not very happy because you can see the situation, geopolitical situation. Militarily, India has to catch up with China. And it's easier to talk. Linguistic talk is very good, we'll beat China, muh tod jawab denge and all that. But the fact remains, India doesn't have a policy which is aggressive, which can assure victory for India in a war with China. I don't know whether the Indian general staff have ever worked out a plan that in a war with China, how are we going to move into Tibet and maybe reach up to Lhasa. When I was doing the staff college, there was no such exercise. And despite having had a study tour of Ladakh where we actually saw the Indian Army face to face with the Chinese, I'm afraid India has a lot of catching up to do. The army in India, of course, is not assertive. It doesn't have any political power, unlike the American armed forces. People talk of America, but the American armed forces have a big say in American policy. And American policy all over the globe is based on the strength of their military. While India is the opposite, we have people like, I won't name the defense minister. I mean, he's a good man, very fine chap. He was chief minister of UP at one time. But he looks more like a head priest. There's no dynamism in him. And you have these such men, lackluster men leading India. I don't think India is going to move forward. The only saving grace is that Narendra Modi has realized the situation, and one hopes that he'll take action. I will close now, gentlemen. The situation is very fluid on the border with China, and India is on its own. Let's see what happens. They are omnious potence that he could be getting ready for a clash on the border, and that will be detrimental for both China and India, more so for India. And India will have to do better than what they're doing now. I close now, gentlemen, and say Jai Hind. Glory to India. Do subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends, come back for more. God bless and goodbye.